The tragedy of the commons. To buy or not to buy, that is the question. Hi, I'm David. Today we're going to talk about the tragedy of the commons. Let's get started. Tragedy of the commons. So, this sounds very dramatic, and it is a very dramatic title, but it's pretty fitting, to be honest with you. So the tragedy of the commons is the situation where a good is communally available, but it is a hybrid between a public and a private good, also known as a common pool resource good. So what happens here is it is commonly available for everybody, but because it is scarce, generally scarce, it then falls into this hybrid category. Just make sure that you put that in a box. It is often going to be told to you that it is a public good, but remember that sometimes when it comes to theory and practice, there is a difference. The tragedy of the commons happens when individuals place their own needs or their personal gain over the well-being of society. It leads to overconsumption of a resource up to its depletion. And the resource must be a rival good. If you remember that from our charts, a rival good is something that can only be enjoyed by one consumer at a time and one consumer only. So if you were to consider a non-rival good, that would be something like Hulu or Netflix. Everybody can watch the same episode of the same show at the same time in different places. But a rival good would be something like a fish. So the resource must be a rival good which is non-excludable and often scarce. Now, it is typically scarce, but the reason that I say often scarce is because we're getting hung up on a small technicality. What's going to be scarce in one region isn't going to be scarce in the next town. So, for example, if you have a creek or a river in your town and you end up running out of fish in that creek or river, the next town has a river too. So, is it scarce? Not really, but it's limited or finite within the local region. So bear that in mind when you talk about this because there are differences. We have the background here of what's going on with the tragedy of the commons. Let's go into an example. The most common example that's used is when you have an area of grass or grasslands that is overfed or overeaten by local cattle. So everybody has their own cows and they allow their cows to use this shared land, but they end up eating all of the grass and there's nothing left. So they have completely depleted the resource, but grass isn't exactly scarce. So it's like on the other side of the mountain, you can go scoop up some dirt and bring some back over. It's not the end of the world, but in their local region, it is gone, it is depleted, and that hurts everybody. So what are some possible solutions here? The first one is community action. This one is always, or almost always, going to be the most beneficial to everybody in the general vicinity around this issue. The next one are private property laws and government regulation, but both of those can suffer from rent-seeking, knowledge, and principal-agent relationships. When it comes to rent-seeking, it's somebody seeking to increase their own wealth without contributing or producing anything to the economy. And principal-agent is when an organization such as a government owns a piece of land and then delegates that land to somebody to manage the resources of it, but then it creates so many regulations. So the delegated individual is unable to do anything with the resource or the land because regulations are a little bit out of control. I'll give you a good example. Utah. If you take a bucket while it is raining in Utah and you put it outside to catch rainwater, you are going to be fined or go to prison. That is not a joke. Sometimes government intervention doesn't really make sense and it's not really beneficial to anybody. It's not like you're lining the entire state with a bucket, you have 10 million buckets all around you and you're stopping all of the water from going into the soil. You're not killing everything off with one bucket, but it is what it is. So let's move on. Now, private property laws, when it comes to land, it can be beneficial in its own ways, but it can also end up with government favors or various other problems such as buying, selling, and again, the rent seeking. So somebody ends up with the property and they end up seeking somebody to rent it from them without actually creating any wealth. So then you end up with somebody that is overcharging for the use of the land and the resource, and there's really no benefit from it. It's not a socially optimal solution. Now, the private property laws, though, can help to divide up an area of perhaps grassland or even fishing canals for various organizations or companies to utilize. And government regulation can also limit how many fish can be fished out of the sea or how many cattle can be available to graze on one piece of land per acre or hectare. There are a lot of different various solutions that are out there, but again, typically when it comes to government regulation, you have to watch out for these three problems. And private property laws can also contribute to these problems as well. So let's move on to some questions that you might find in your textbook. A common good is defined by meeting which two criteria? Access must be restricted and consumption of the good must be rival, A. B. Access must be unrestricted and the consumption of the good must be rival. C. Access must be unrestricted and the consumption of the good must not be rival. Or D. Access must be restricted and the consumption of the good must not be rival. The answer is B. So the access must be unrestricted and the consumption of the good must be rival, because it is a common good. You can't necessarily get people to pay for because it's in the common area. So something like Netflix, which is the perfect example of a non-rival good, is that everybody can watch the same show anywhere in the world at the same time or at any time they want. So common good, there we are. Let's go next. The next question is, which of the following is not a type of solution to the tragedy of the commons? Establishing property rights and a market to trade those rights. That's the first one, A. B. A central authority creates regulations on access and use. C. Resource use or destruction is taxed to make users incur the cost of environmental damage, users, consumers. And D. Removing regulatory restraints on economic growth. The answer is D. Removing regulation on economic growth. So for example, when you have those cows that are overflowing or overpopulated in a field and they are eating all of the grass, you create regulations to stop that, so you limit the amount of cows in an area, but by removing those regulations, that would be against the tragedy of the commons problem. It's not a solution. It would be a contributing factor to perpetuating the situation. So the last question is, what are the important factors that make it easier or more difficult to manage a commons? Now, there are a lot of different things that can go into this because, again, as with any topic that we will ever discuss, there's always going to be a difference between theory and practice. So let's talk about maybe 2 or 3 of these. So, something that would make it easier to manage commons would be a communal agreement or arrangement. So if you were to just go up to the neighbor and say, hey, I'd like your cows to have Tuesday and Thursday and my cows to have Monday and Wednesday, and then on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, we'll allow the soil and everything else to kind of rest. And we'll try not to have more than 3 cows per acre at any given time. That's a very easy solution to managing a commons, but sometimes people don't want to talk to each other. So something that could make it more difficult to manage is the differences in locale. For example, that there is a hill, and usually the rain runs down one side of the hill, so that side ends up very green and luscious, while the other side of the hill is more brown and dead. And that's just within a few miles or kilometers of each other. That could make it much more difficult to create a common solution, and even more difficult for regulators to come up with a solution that's optimum for the area. So there's terrain, there's location in general, there are various factors that can go into a number of these things. So what do you think? Leave a comment below. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Don't forget to subscribe. Check out other videos, like, share, comment, hit that bell for notifications on future videos, and we'll see you next time.